I pushed open the back door a little after midnight, the kind of hour when the world feels too quiet, too brittle, and every small sound echoes like a warning. My scrubs still smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee, and my shoulder ached from lifting patients during my shift, but all I wanted was a shower and maybe 4 hours of sleep before sunrise. I was halfway across the living room when I realized something was wrong. The house was silent in a way that was not natural. No television murmuring from the den, no clinking dishes from my mother cleaning before bed, no footsteps in the hallway. Just a low, humming quiet that pressed against my ears. I stepped into the kitchen and froze. Richard was sitting at the table like he had been waiting hours. His elbows rested wide, claiming the entire space like a throne, and in his right hand he held a large kitchen knife. Not cutting vegetables, not cleaning it, just gripping it casually, the blade glinting under the single overhead bulb. I stopped breathing. His eyes slid toward me, slow and deliberate, the way a predator tracks something it has already decided belongs to it. "Took you long enough," he said, voice scratchy from whatever he had been drinking. I smelled bourbon before I saw the empty bottle at his feet. I swallowed hard. "Where is Mom?" I asked. He smirked. "Working." "She is always working. Someone has to hold this house together." His tone sharpened as he sat forward. "And someone is trying to tear it apart." My pulse kicked up. "What are you talking about?" I said, keeping my voice low, steady, the way I spoke to patients on the edge of panic. He tapped the knife against the table. A soft metallic tick that sent a tremor through my ribs. You think I do not hear things. You think I do not know what you say to the neighbors. You think I do not know you have been sticking your nose where it does not belong." I shook my head, but he kept talking faster now, words slurred but sharp. "You think you are better than me just because you wear that little nurse badge and pretend you save lives. You think you get to judge this family." My skin crawled. "I have not talked to anyone," I said. "I just came home from work. I have nothing to do with anything." Richard stood up. The chair screeched against the tile. I flinched at the sound, and his grin widened like he enjoyed seeing me react. He held the knife loosely but with purpose, letting the tip hover near his thigh as he stepped closer. "You think I am stupid," he said. "You think I do not see what you are doing. You want your mother to leave me. You want to take her money." His breath was hot and sour. I stepped back instinctively, bumping into the counter. "What money?" I asked. His eyes flickered with a rage that made my stomach twist. "Your mother has savings," he said. "You know she does, and you are the reason she will not give it to me. You fill her head with doubts, you make her weak. That is going to stop tonight." My mouth went dry. Richard raised the knife, not swinging it, just lifting it enough that the cold reflection brushed across my face. "I told you before," he said in a whisper that made my skin crawl. "Families stay loyal. You do not get to walk around here acting like some outsider who makes the rules." I tried to angle my body sideways, creating space to move past him. "I just need to go to my room," I said. "I am tired. I do not want to fight." He laughed, but it was not a laugh at all. It was a sharp, joyless bark. "You are not going anywhere." Then he stepped toward me so fast I only had time to suck in a breath. I tried to slip past him, but his arm came down hard. I felt the sting before I saw it. A slicing burn across the top of my shoulder, hot and bright like someone had pressed fire to my skin. The air rushed out of my lungs. I stumbled, grabbing the counter to steady myself. My vision blurred for a second, and when it cleared, Richard was towering over me, knife still in hand, nostrils flaring with the rush of control. "Look what you made me do," he snarled. "Always pushing, always fighting, always acting like you are too good for this family." I clutched my shoulder. My fingers came away warm and wet. Panic shot through me, cold and electric. "I need to leave," I whispered. He raised the knife again. "I said you are not going anywhere." Something in me snapped. Not courage, not strength, just survival. I ducked under his arm and shoved past him with everything I had. He swung again, missing my face by inches as I darted toward the back door. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. My legs felt weak and fiery at the same time. The pain in my shoulder throbbed in sickening pulses. Behind me, he roared a sound that barely resembled human words. You think anyone will believe you? You think anyone will take your side? You will come crawling back. You hear me? Crawling. I pushed the door open and stumbled into the night. The humid North Carolina air slapped my face. My feet hit the grass unevenly as I ran a few more steps before my knees buckled. I collapsed onto the cool ground, pressing my free hand into the dirt to keep the world from spinning. My shoulder was soaked, my breath ragged, my pulse frantic. From the doorway, Richard shouted again, "No one will believe you. Not one person. I will make sure of it." The porch light cast his shadow across the yard like a long, reaching arm. But I could not move. My body trembled too much. My mind was a storm, and as the pain carved deeper into my shoulder, I understood one awful truth. This was only the beginning, before everything spiraled into fear and blood and whispered threats in the dark. My life looked ordinary from the outside, the way so many troubled American families look ordinary until someone pulls back a curtain. I worked long night shifts at Cape Fear Valley Medical Center, the kind of shifts that blur hours together until sunrise feels like a distant promise. I loved my job even when it drained me. There was something grounding about treating patients who came in scared and left safer. Something about watching human resilience. Something about hoping that if I spent enough time around healing, maybe some of it would rub off on my own life. I lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of Fayetteville, 5 miles from my mother's house, close enough to check on her when she needed, but far enough that I could breathe. My apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from safety. I had posters pinned on the wall, a few thrift store plants that somehow stayed alive, and a bookshelf full of nursing textbooks and half-read mystery novels. I kept things clean. I kept things predictable. I tried to keep my world steady even though the place that should have felt like home had stopped feeling safe years ago. My mother Diana had always been gentle, too gentle. She worked at a roadside motel on Bragg Boulevard, mostly cleaning shifts and occasional front desk coverage. She was the sort of person who apologized when someone bumped into her, the kind of woman who gave second chances because she believed it was the Christian thing to do, even when it meant she got stepped on. After my father died when I was 12, she fell into a hollow sadness that lasted years. My father had been quiet and calm, a man who worked long hours at a printing company and still managed to sit beside me at the dinner table with patience in his eyes. When he passed, my mother clung to the idea of companionship like it was the only life raft left. So when Richard Hale showed up all charisma and helping hands, she let herself believe he was a blessing sent to pull her from grief. I was 15 when they married. At the wedding, he shook my hand with too tight a grip, the kind that said he wanted to test boundaries. He said he was glad to finally have a daughter. I remember thinking he pronounced the word daughter like something he intended to own. Richard worked as a mechanic at a garage near Haymount. He laughed loud, drank loud, and bragged loud. He had a way of filling every room, swallowing all the space until no one else could breathe comfortably. But he knew how to charm. He brought my mother flowers for no reason. He fixed neighbors' tires at a discount. He coached my brother Ryan's Little League team. For a while, people called him a family man. I saw the truth sooner than most. His temper came first in small bursts. A slammed cabinet, a muttered curse when dinner was late, a hard grip on my mother's wrist when she suggested he skip a night of drinking. I learned to move quietly like my footsteps might trigger something. I kept my bedroom door locked. I avoided the kitchen when he was around. And then there was Ryan, my half-brother in name only, 3 years younger than me, but somehow always walking around as if the world owed him something. He dropped out of community college after 1 semester. He refused to keep a job for longer than 2 weeks. He thought responsibility was for people who lacked imagination. And he loved Richard. He loved the loud voice, the rough jokes, the swagger. He copied the way Richard walked, the way he mocked people weaker than him, the way he blamed everyone else for his failures. As I grew older and moved out on my own, I tried to keep a healthy distance from them, but I still went over for dinner occasionally because my mother begged me to. She said family needed to stay close. She said Richard was trying. She said things were getting better even when I could see her hands shake. The violence did not start overnight. It never does. It built itself piece by piece the way rust eats away at metal too slowly for anyone to notice until something collapses. First came the comments about my job. Richard liked to say nurses were just glorified assistants. He smirked when I dragged myself through the door after a 12-hour shift, saying that real work was fixing engines. Then came the financial control. He took my mother's paychecks, promising to manage household expenses because she was too soft-hearted. She believed him. She believed everything he said until belief became a habit she could no longer break. I saw early signs of what he was becoming. He monitored her phone. He questioned every place she went. He once drove to the motel during her shift just to see if she was telling the truth. When I confronted her about it, she brushed it off like it was nothing, saying he was protective, not controlling. Even now, I can hear her voice trying to defend him. He means well. He just gets overwhelmed. Everyone gets angry sometimes. This is normal. But anger is only normal when it comes with remorse. Richard's anger never did. Eventually, he redirected it toward me. I had become the threat. The one person who might tell my mother she deserved better. The one person who refused to bend under his voice. Whenever I visited, he would step into my space just a little too close. He asked what I made at the hospital. He asked if I planned to help with bills. He asked why I lived alone, why I did not date more, why I did not call more often, why I did not respect him like a father. My answers never mattered. He just wanted to pick at me, to test me, to see what would make me flinch. Some visits ended with dishes thrown into the sink. Some ended with him slamming the front door as he stormed off. Some ended with my mother crying silently in the bathroom while I sat on the couch pretending the world was not cracking at the edges. Looking back, I realize how many signs I ignored. The night he snapped at her for burning dinner. The time he kicked over a chair because she forgot to wash his uniform. The morning he grabbed her by the arm so hard she winced and told me she bruised easily. I wanted to shake her awake, tell her she was not living, she was surviving. But victims protect their abusers long after they should have run. I did not understand that fully until later. Before the night in the kitchen, before the knife, before the blood soaking through my shirt, I lived in a careful balancing act. Work rest, check on mom. Avoid, Richard repeat. I thought if I stayed small enough, quiet enough, distant enough, maybe the storm would never reach me. But storms do not wait for permission. They hit the closest objects first. And I had been standing too close for far too long. People imagine abuse as a sudden explosion, a single moment when everything snaps, but that is never how it starts. Abuse grows quietly like mold in the corners of a house, creeping in slowly, until one day you look around and realize the whole structure is rotting from the inside. By the time the knife touched my skin in the kitchen, Richard had already built an entire world where his moods were laws and the rest of us were expected to orbit around them. The truth is, the violence became routine long before it turned bloody. The first time he threw a bottle was during a Sunday dinner 3 years before the knife incident. We were sitting around the table eating roast chicken, and my mother mentioned that the electric bill was higher than usual. Richard slammed his fork down so hard it bounced. Then he stood up, grabbed his half-empty bottle of bourbon, and hurled it at the far wall. It shattered near the doorway glass, spraying across the floor in sharp, glittering shards. He then blamed my mother for letting the lights run too long, for wasting money, for caring more about comfort than responsibility. My mother apologized as if she had done something wrong. Ryan laughed. I learned to keep my face completely blank. After that night, the sound of glass breaking became strangely normal. Sometimes it was a bottle. Sometimes it was a plate. Sometimes it was a ceramic mug my mother had owned since I was a child. Everything in that house felt fragile, including us. There were days Richard seemed calm, even decent. He would repair the leaky faucet or patch a hole in the fence. Those were the moments my mother clung to as proof that he was still a good man. But calm never lasted. Anger was always waiting beneath his skin, ready to ignite over something as small as a misplaced set of keys. When he got angry, the kitchen was his stage. He would stand at this counter, gripping the edge so hard his knuckles whitened, and he would tap a knife against the cutting board in slow, rhythmic beats. Tap, tap, tap. A warning, a countdown, a threat wrapped in the disguise of everyday routine. It became so normal that sometimes I did not even notice I was holding my breath until he left the room and my lungs finally unlocked. He had a habit of locking the kitchen door when he wanted to lecture me. He would stand between me and the exit arms crossed to the scent of grease and cheap alcohol clinging to him. He would say things like, "You need to learn respect, or you think you are smarter than everyone else here, or your mother listens to you too much." He treated every conversation like a test he needed to win. I never passed. Ryan started picking up his behavior like it was a skill he admired. He would lean in the doorway smirking whenever Richard targeted me. If I stood up for myself, Ryan would scoff and say things like, "Calm down, you are overreacting, or maybe try not acting superior." Once, when I contradicted something Richard said, Ryan shoved my shoulder as I walked past him, not hard enough to knock me down, but hard enough to make sure I knew he could. My mother tried to mediate sometimes, but Richard silenced her with a single look. She folded into herself like a paper flower caught in rain. The financial control only made everything worse. Richard refused to let my mother handle money. He said it was because she was too soft and easily manipulated, but the only person manipulating her was him. She gave him every paycheck without question. When I asked her once if she had emergency savings, she whispered that she used to, but she could not remember how much was left because he handled everything. I wanted to scream at her, but I swallowed the urge because victims do not respond to anger. They respond to someone offering a lifeline, and I was still trying to figure out how to throw her one without drowning myself. He escalated physically over time, but never in ways that would leave obvious marks, at least not at first. He would shove past me in the hallway a little too hard. He would flick my hair and say I was sensitive when I told him to stop. He would push a door closed just as I walked through, forcing me to jerk back to avoid getting hit. It was all small enough to deny, small enough for him to say I imagined it, and he always smirked afterward, proud of getting away with something no one else could see. The emotional abuse came daily, woven into normal moments like threads of poison. If I brought home takeout after a long shift, he would say, "Real women cook." If I wore my scrubs into the house, he said nurses only wore those because they wanted attention. When I mentioned a promotion opportunity, once he laughed and said hospitals only promoted women to look good for the public. It got to the point where I stopped sharing anything about my life because every accomplishment became ammunition for him to tear apart. My mother noticed the tension, but she kept telling me to stay calm, to be patient, to understand that Richard had been under a lot of pressure. I wanted to shake her and ask why she never wondered why he was only under pressure when someone challenged him. The worst part was that I started adapting to his patterns without realizing it. I stopped scheduling my visits on weekends because those were his heavy drinking days. I stopped cooking when he was home because he always found something wrong with it. I started timing my breaths when he paced the kitchen because I knew if I inhaled at the wrong moment, he would say I was sighing at him and start an argument. He even controlled how loud the house was. My mother kept the television volume so low it was barely audible because any noise irritated him. She tiptoed around like a shadow. I followed her lead. I became good at disappearing. The day he tore up my mother's paycheck stub in front of me was the day I realized he enjoyed breaking things she cared about. He held the paper between his fingers, ripped it into pieces, and let the scraps fall like snow onto the floor. He stared at me while he did it, waiting to see if it hurt me. It did. He liked that. Even now, I can picture his expression. Triumph mixed with something darker, something hungry. The scariest part was how normal it all felt. Violence should feel shocking, but when it happens every week, every day, sometimes every hour, it becomes part of the rhythm of the house. I started keeping my shoes near the back door so I could leave quickly. I kept my keys in my scrub pocket instead of my purse. I kept my phone fully charged at all times. These are not habits people usually notice, but they are survival techniques, and they were becoming second nature. Looking back, I know I should have left earlier. I know I should have dragged my mother out with me. I know I should have called the police long before the knife. But victims do not run at the first sign of danger. We wait for the storm to pass. We hope this time will be different. We tell ourselves we are overreacting. We normalize the chaos because it is easier than admitting we are trapped. But storms do not fade on their own. They grow, they strengthen, they learn. And Richard had been learning exactly how far he could push before anyone would stop him. The truth became clear only later. The night he nearly slashed my shoulder open was not the beginning. It was the moment everything he had been building finally broke loose. The ride to the emergency room blurred together in a haze of adrenaline dizziness and a throbbing heat that pulsed through my shoulder like a small wildfire. I remember pressing my hand over the wound, feeling the sticky warmth seep through my fingers, no matter how tightly I tried to hold it in. I remember staring at the passing streetlights through the taxi window, each one flashing like a warning that my life had crossed a line I could not step back over. When the nurse asked what happened, her voice was soft, careful, almost too gentle. "A kitchen accident," I said, automatically, the lie forming before I even took my next breath. She looked at me for a moment longer than necessary, her eyes tilting with the kind of recognition only medical staff have, the kind that comes from seeing too many women walk in with injuries that never match their explanations. But she did not push. People rarely do. Victims have a way of telling the world to back off without saying a word. They stitched me up under bright fluorescent lights, the kind that wash every emotion off your face until you look like a blank canvas. The doctor said the cut was deep but clean. He asked again if I was sure it was an accident. I nodded. I felt like I was watching myself from outside my own body, as if the woman lying there with bloody scrubs and trembling hands was someone I barely recognized. Trauma does that. It splits you in half. When I got back home later, the house felt darker than usual. Richard had cleaned the little trail of blood from the floor, probably to erase any sign of what he had done. Abusers love erasing evidence almost as much as they love creating the damage in the first place. He was sitting on the couch when I stepped inside, arms crossed expression, carved into a mask of self-righteous calm. He did not ask if I was in pain. He did not ask if I was okay. He only asked if I had told anyone what really happened. I shook my head slowly, eyes fixed on the carpet. My mother rushed from the hallway, her face pale. She reached for my arm, but stopped just before touching my injured shoulder. "Oh, Emily," she whispered. "What happened?" Before I could answer, Richard cut in. "She slipped, cut herself. She needs to be more careful." My mother nodded in small, terrified motions. I could see her lips tremble. She did not believe him, but she did not dare challenge him either. That was the thing about my mother. She knew the truth long before she admitted it, but she had learned to survive by pretending things were not as bad as they were. Pretending kept her safe. Pretending kept the walls from collapsing. Later that night, after she went to bed, I overheard them in the kitchen. Richard's voice was low but sharp. "She is becoming a problem," he said. "She will ruin everything." My mother murmured something I could not make out. Richard continued, "If she talks, we are finished. I will make sure she stays quiet." The words were like ice water on my spine. I backed away from the hallway, heart slamming against my ribs. It was no longer about anger or arguments. This had become survival. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house thickened like smoke. Richard hovered near me in ways that felt deliberate, stepping into my path, so I had to move around him, standing silently in doorways, watching me with a glare that said he was measuring what I might do next. Ryan made things worse. He laughed when he saw my bandaged shoulder, cracked jokes about me being clumsy, asked how someone as supposedly smart as me managed to injure myself so stupidly. And every time he said something, Richard watched me for a reaction, as if he were waiting for me to slip to confess to break. Mornings became the worst. Richard always woke before the rest of us and paced the kitchen, the same kitchen where he had cornered me with that knife. I avoided the room as much as I could, but eventually I had to walk in. The tension was always instant, a suffocating silence that wrapped around my throat. He would glance at my shoulder, then at my face, as if reminding me the knife had already cut once and could cut again. The fear settled into me like a second skin. I could not sleep without jolting awake from phantom images of the blade flashing near my collarbone. I could not eat without feeling nauseous. I carried the scent of bourbon and metal with me everywhere I went, even at work. Trauma has a way of lingering, like a shadow you can never step out of. I started noticing all the small signs of danger that I had ignored before. The dents on the lower cabinet doors, the crack in the pantry wall where he had slammed his fist months ago, the way the lights flickered because he had once yanked a lamp cord so violently it damaged the outlet. The scars of violence were woven into the structure of the house, invisible to strangers, but impossible for me to unsee. My mother tiptoed around Richard more than ever. She spoke softly. She waited for his mood to shift before asking anything. She barely made eye contact with me, guilt written across her face like bruised ink. She knew. She had known for years, but she could not save me. She could barely save herself. One night as I was getting ready to leave for work, she pulled me aside. "Emily," she said, voice trembling, "do not make him angry. Please." That was all she said. That was all she needed to say. Fear had seeped into every corner of our lives, settling in the cracks like dust. I left for my shift, shaking not from exhaustion this time, but from the realization that no amount of pretending, no amount of silence, no amount of patience would stop what Richard was becoming. The violence had been escalating for years, inch by inch by inch, until it reached me in the form of a knife against my skin. And I knew something then with a terrifying clarity. The man who cut my shoulder was not done. He had tasted power. He had seen fear in my eyes. And for men like him, that kind of control becomes addictive. Every instinct in my body told me that the next time would be worse. Much worse. The days after the knife incident twisted into something darker than anything I had experienced before, like the house had shifted into a different dimension where danger pulsed through the walls and every breath felt like it might trigger something violent. Richard had always been unpredictable, but now there was a new edge to him, something sharper, something hungry. Once he realized I had not told anyone the truth, his confidence grew like a wildfire. It was as if cutting me had unlocked something inside him, something he no longer felt the need to hide. The first escalation happened during breakfast 2 mornings after I returned from the ER. I was moving slowly, still tender from the stitches, when Richard walked into the kitchen with a scowl. My mother had made eggs and toast, trying to create some illusion of normalcy as she placed plates on the counter. I reached for mine, trying to slip away before he could trap me again, but the moment my fingers touched the plate, he knocked it hard out of my hands. It hit the floor, eggs splattering across the tile. The plate cracked in half. My mother gasped. Richard pointed a finger at me, eyes narrowing into slits. "Pick it up." His tone was low, almost calm, which made it more terrifying than shouting. I crouched slowly, my shoulder throbbing as I bent down. My hands shook. When I picked up the broken pieces, he leaned closer. "Sloppy," he said. "Always so sloppy." My mother whispered, "Richard, please," but he shot her a look that froze her in place. That was the beginning of the next pattern. Over the following days, he started knocking things out of my hands whenever I walked past him. Water glasses, mail, a whole basket of laundry once. It was never enough to justify calling the police. Never enough to leave visible bruises, but always enough to remind me he could destroy my peace whenever he wanted. Then came the hair pulling. It happened the first time when I contradicted something he said about my mother's paycheck. He turned eyes wide with indignation, grabbed a fistful of my hair, and yanked so hard my scalp stung for the rest of the day. He held me still for a moment, just long enough for fear to freeze my spine, then released me with a shove that sent me bumping into the counter. He did it again 2 days later when I did not answer him fast enough. Again when I tried to leave the room before he was finished talking. It became a twisted form of punctuation to his rage. If I said the wrong thing, tug. If I moved the wrong way, yank. If I breathed at the wrong time, pull. Ryan noticed, of course. He always noticed. Instead of stepping in, he laughed. One afternoon, he leaned against the hallway wall and said, "Maybe she will learn to listen now." That was how he saw me. Not as a sister, but as an object that needed correcting. The phone incident happened soon after. I had been texting my coworker not about the abuse, but about switching shifts. Richard walked by, saw the phone in my hand, and snatched it so fast my fingers scraped against the case. He threw it to the floor with such force the screen cracked. "Next time talk to people openly," he said. No secrets in this house. When I bent to pick it up, he stepped on it with his boot, grinding the glass deeper. You will get another one, he said. But maybe now you will think twice about hiding things. My mother cried that night in her room. I heard her muffled sobs through the thin walls. She did not come out. She did not try to comfort me. Love had become something she rationed, giving just enough to survive under his thumb. The worst escalation happened when he targeted my job. Richard knew how much my work meant to me. He knew the hospital was the one place I felt competent, valued, steady. So he went after that too. One afternoon, he grabbed my scrub top from the laundry basket, dunked it into a sink full of dirty dishwater, and rubbed it against the grimy sides of the basin. When he handed it back to me, dripping and smelling of grease and old food, he smiled. Wear this tonight. Let them see what you really are. I washed it 3 times and still cried on my way to work because the stain on the collar would not come out. I could not tell anyone. I could not ask for help. Abuse isolates you like that. It makes you think telling someone would somehow make everything worse. It convinces you that you deserve the chaos. Nights became the most terrifying part of the day. Richard had a habit of pacing the hallway around 3 in the morning, drunk and restless. I would wake to the sound of heavy steps, slow and deliberate, passing my door again and again. Sometimes he would stop directly outside my room and stand there silent. I could hear him breathing. I held my blanket to my chest and counted the seconds until he moved on. My door was locked, but locks mean nothing when the danger lives on the other side. Sleep came in fragments. Fear seeped into everything I did. I flinched when someone at the hospital spoke loudly. I jumped when a coworker dropped a tray. Every time a man raised his hand to gesture something, my heart raced. Trauma rewires your senses until ordinary movements feel like threats. That was when I started recording things secretly. I downloaded a voice memo app and kept my phone in my pocket whenever I walked through the house. I bought a small camera meant for pet monitoring and taped it behind a plant in the living room. I did not know exactly what I was building toward. I only knew I needed proof. Something undeniable. Something I could not talk myself out of believing later. My mother noticed me becoming quieter, but she did not ask why. She had been living in survival mode for so long that she saw my silence as normal. The only time she spoke about the situation was when she whispered, "Please do not provoke him. We just need to get through the week." Every victim I have ever treated at the hospital has said something similar. Just need to get through the day. Just need to get through the week. Just need to wait for the storm to pass. But storms do not pass when the person creating them enjoys the destruction. And Richard enjoyed every second of control he had over the house. The fear became so constant that by the time the second shock arrived, I was not even surprised. Just exhausted. Just tired of feeling like prey in a house that used to hold my childhood memories. But exhaustion can become fuel, and fear can become clarity. I did not know it yet, but the moment the violence reached its new peak, something inside me would finally snap in the right direction. Not into panic, but into action. The monster was growing, yes. But so was something in me. Something he did not expect. The second shock did not arrive with the sound of breaking glass or the flash of a blade. It came quietly with the kind of calm that only truly dangerous people possess. It happened the afternoon after my stitches were checked at the clinic, when my shoulder still throbbed beneath the bandages and every movement reminded me of the cold steel that had sliced through my skin. I had just stepped into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, moving slowly so I would not strain the injury, when I heard the front door slam. Richard's footsteps followed uneven and heavy, dragging slightly the way they always did when he had been drinking long enough to poison the air around him. His boots thumped across the floor with a deliberate rhythm, each step pulsing like a warning through the old wooden boards. I froze instinctively, shrinking into myself, the glass in my hand trembling. He walked into the kitchen and stopped in the doorway, staring at me with an expression that made my stomach clench. His eyes were glassy, but his stare was sharp-focused, unsettlingly sober behind the drunken haze clinging to his breath. He inhaled slowly, letting the silence stretch, letting me drown in it. "So, Emily," he said finally, still playing the victim. I swallowed hard. I did not say anything. I knew better. Words were sparks around him. He stepped closer, the smell of bourbon mixing with the faint chemical scent of motor oil that always clung to his clothes. "You think you can make me look bad?" he said. "You think your little attitude is going to scare me?" My pulse quickened. I kept my hands at my sides. "I am not trying to do anything," I said quietly. "I just want peace." "Peace," he repeated like the word itself offended him. Then he chuckled, and the sound curled into my nerves like a hook. "Peace is something you earn, not something you get for free." He walked past me and yanked open the drawer next to the stove. For a split second, my breath caught, terrified he was reaching for another knife. But instead, he pulled out a small coil of rope and a roll of duct tape. My heart stopped. My mind blanked. For a moment, I did not even understand what he planned to use them for. Then he turned, holding the items in one hand, and smiled a slow, cruel smile. "You made me look weak the other night," he said softly, making noise, running outside, crying like a child. "You embarrassed me. And now you are going to fix it." His words stuck in my throat. "What do you want?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. He stepped forward and dropped the coil of rope onto the table. The sound was soft, but it felt louder than a gunshot. "You are going to kneel," he said, "on the floor. You are going to apologize for the disrespect. You are going to say you were wrong to fight me, wrong to make your mother worry, and wrong to think you can walk around this house without consequences." My lungs squeezed tight. My hands grew cold. I shook my head weakly. "I am not doing that." Richard's expression changed. It tightened into something flat and dangerous, something that sucked the warmth from the room. He lifted the duct tape, peeling a strip slowly, the ripping sound slicing through the silence. "You will do it, or I will make you do it." I stepped back instinctively, hitting the counter. The movement sent a jolt of pain through my shoulder, and I winced. Richard noticed. He always noticed. "You think that little cut makes you brave," he said. "You think it means you can defy me." His voice softened, which somehow made it worse. "But you are still weak. And weak people kneel." He reached for my arm. I reacted without thinking, jerking away so fast I bumped into a chair. The legs scraped violently against the tile before tipping, crashing to the floor. The noise echoed through the kitchen like an alarm. For a moment, everything froze. His eyes widened just slightly, fear flickering through them. Not fear for me, but fear of being heard, of neighbors noticing, of someone asking questions he did not want to answer. He grabbed my wrist anyway, squeezing hard enough to send a shock of pain up my arm. My knees buckled as he pulled downward, trying to force me into a kneeling position. "Stop!" I gasped. "Richard, stop." He pushed harder, but the commotion we created finally snapped something in him. Not guilt, not humanity, just calculation. He let go abruptly, stepping back with a scowl. "Get up!" he hissed. "Now!" I scrambled away from him, my back hitting the cabinets. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. He ran a hand through his hair, gripping it in frustration. Then he pointed the roll of duct tape at me. "This is not over. You will kneel. Maybe not today. Maybe not tonight. But you will kneel. You owe me that." He kicked the fallen chair aside as he left the kitchen, muttering curses under his breath. The moment he disappeared down the hall, my legs gave out. I sank to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. My shoulder throbbed. My stomach churned. My throat burned from holding in a scream. I stared at the rope on the table, its coils still perfectly neat, untouched. But the sight of it felt like another blade pressed against my skin. A weapon made not to cut, but to humiliate, to break me. The second shock was not about violence. It was about dominance. It was about taking away my last shred of dignity. It was about forcing me into submission, not through fear of pain, but through fear of shame, through fear of being reduced to something less than human. And in that moment on the kitchen floor, I understood something chilling. The knife had been the beginning. The rope was the escalation. But the worst part was how this new threat felt different from the others. It felt planned, practiced, Like he had thought about this, imagined it, looked forward to it. That realization hollowed me out. It made something inside me crack in a way that could not be undone. Fear had been growing around me for months, thickening like fog. But now it was inside me, coiled tight, squeezing my breath with every heartbeat. I knew then that Richard would not stop, not until he destroyed me completely, not until he proved in whatever twisted way he wanted that I belonged beneath his thumb. But fear does one of two things. It either swallows you whole or it fuels you. And while I did not know it yet that moment, that rope, that demand to kneel, that attempt to crush my spirit, it lit a spark in me, a small one, fragile, but real. The rope was his second shock, but it was also the beginning of the end, for him. The rope stayed on the kitchen table long after Richard stormed out of the room like a lingering threat, a reminder carved into the air that he was no longer satisfied with fear alone. He wanted obedience. He wanted humiliation. He wanted proof that I belonged beneath him. And for the first time since the knife tore my skin, the fear that had been suffocating me shifted into something sharper. Not anger, not courage. Something quieter, steadier, colder. Resolve. The moment I could breathe again, I stood up slowly, my legs trembling as though they had forgotten how to hold me. I picked up the rope with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated and dropped it into a cabinet drawer. Not to hide it. To remind myself it existed. To remind myself of the line he had crossed. The line I would never let him cross again. That night, after the house fell into an uneasy silence, I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling. I barely blinked. Every shadow seemed like a threat. Every creak of the floorboards made my pulse stutter. I replayed the moment he reached for my arm, the moment he pulled, the moment I felt myself almost fall to my knees, and something inside me clenched hard. I would not kneel, not for him, not for anyone who mistook cruelty for strength. The thought repeated like a heartbeat, I will not kneel, I will not kneel. But refusal alone would not protect me. Refusal would not save my mother. Refusal would not expose him. I needed a plan, something undeniable, something public, something he could not twist or silence or hide behind bourbon and lies. Abusers thrive in shadows, they shrivel in the light. I just needed the right moment to shine that light on him. My job at the hospital taught me that evidence wins. Facts win. Truth wins when it is undeniable. So the first part of the plan was simple: collect proof. I already had a small collection on my phone of the yelling, the threats, the crack of glass hitting walls, but it was not enough. His voice alone could be dismissed as anger, not violence. People like Richard always twisted the narrative. She made me upset. She exaggerated. She bruises too easily. She lies. She wants attention. I needed something that stripped every excuse and left only the truth. The next morning, before Richard woke, I slipped my phone beneath a stack of dish towels on the counter and recorded for 20 minutes as he yelled at my mother for misplacing his new wrench. It was not dramatic. Nothing flew across the room, but his tone, the venom in it, was enough to chill the air. I saved the recording. Then I ordered a second mini camera hidden inside what looked like a charging block. I placed it near the living room outlet facing the entire space. Another camera went in the hallway behind a decorative vase. Abusers think they control everything in their environment. That arrogance makes them sloppy. While he was at the garage, I also walked through the house with my phone camera. I recorded the dents in the lower cabinets, the cracked lines in the pantry wall, the chipped corner where he had slammed a plate. Physical evidence of long-term aggression that no reasonable person could mistake for accidents. I documented the broken phone he stepped on, the stain on my scrub top from when he soaked it. I recorded the chair he kicked the night he almost forced me down. The environment itself had become a witness. I needed more than objects, though. I needed his face, his hands, his voice saying the things he believed no one would ever hear. Abusers are bold when they think no one is watching. So over the next few days, I provoked conversations carefully, subtly, not arguments, not fights, just enough that he let his real nature surface. I would ask simple questions that sounded harmless. Richard, Do you think Mom should rest today? Richard. I need to wash my clothes for work. Richard, please do not stand in front of the door. Every time he reacted, he shoved a laundry basket out of my hands. He blocked the exit and forced me to squeeze past him. He tore the corner of an envelope I was holding and told me to grow up. I captured every second I could without him noticing, and I backed up each file onto a hidden drive I left at work inside my locker. If he found the phone, if he destroyed it, I would still have the truth. But proof alone was not enough. I needed a stage. A place where no one could pretend it was not real. A place where the silence that protected him would crack. In our neighborhood, the monthly block party was practically a community ritual. Families dragged out folding tables covered in casseroles. Kids sprayed each other with garden hoses. Men grilled burgers and told the same stories they told every year. People laughed, it chatted, and Richard loved it. He loved the spotlight. He loved how neighbors saw him as the friendly mechanic who offered discounts and drinks. He loved talking loudly about his garage and pretending he was the one holding our household together. He always positioned himself in the center of the crowd. That was the key. That was the crack in his armor. If there was ever a moment to expose him, it would be there. In front of the neighbors who believed he was harmless. In front of the people he desperately wanted to impress. In front of my mother who needed to see the truth in a way that could not be dismissed, denied, or rationalized. I imagined the scene. Him laughing, showing off, standing near the grill, and then the video playing, his voice threatening me, his hand gripping my arm, his demand that I kneel, his knife glinting as he cornered me, his words saying, "No one will believe you." I pictured the expressions around him shifting, the laughter dying, the whispers spreading, the judgment he feared more than anything. Public shame is kryptonite to men like Richard. I could already see how it would unravel him. The only question was how to play the video without him stopping it. That part took planning. I waited until Ryan left for the afternoon one Saturday, and my mother was grocery shopping. Richard had gone to the garage to handle a rush job. I used the empty house to set up the old living room TV, a large flat screen Richard bragged about owning, and connected it to a media stick I bought myself. I loaded the files onto it, organizing them into a single continuous video. One long, unbroken truth. Then I tested it. The footage flickered to life on the screen. Richard's voice filled the living room. It did not even sound like a human being. It sounded like a threat given form. I felt sick hearing it, but I also felt a strange, quiet strength. Proof. Undeniable proof. I wiped tears off my face and continued preparing. I knew Richard would lose control when confronted. I knew he might lash out. So part of my plan was safety. I told my coworker Jenna that I needed her to expect a package addressed to her at her apartment. She did not ask what it was. She trusted me. Inside that package would be the backup drive. My insurance. If anything happened to me, someone would know. Someone would see. And she would call the police. I walked through every scenario in my mind for hours. What he would say, how he would react, whether he would storm out or explode. But every version ended the same way, with people finally seeing the man he really was, with my mother finally understanding she was not crazy for fearing him, with me finally breaking free from the grip he had on my life. It was not just about exposing him. It was about reclaiming my voice, my safety, my dignity. He had stolen pieces of me for years. Now I would take everything back. The plan was ready. All I had to do was wait for the night of the block party, the night everything would change. The night of the block party arrived with the kind of heavy summer heat that clings to your skin and makes every breath feel thick. Neighbors dragged out folding tables onto their driveways, kids chased each other between lawn chairs, and someone down the street played an old rock playlist loud enough that the bass pulsed through the pavement. Everything looked cheerful, familiar, safe. It was the perfect cover for the truth that was about to ignite. I stood beside my mother near the fence line, helping her arrange a tray of brownies she had baked to keep up appearances. She looked tired, her eyes flicking nervously toward the house every few seconds. She was always counting Richard's moods, always anticipating the next shift in weather, like someone who had survived too many storms. Ryan was already holding a beer, laughing too loudly with a group of guys his age. And then Richard appeared. He stepped outside with that signature confidence he wore like a costume. His chin lifted slightly, his chest puffed, his shirt tucked neatly into jeans as if he were hosting the entire event. He carried a beer in one hand, waving at neighbors like he was some beloved patriarch. I watched the way he gripped my mother's shoulder when he passed her fingers, digging into her skin just enough to leave a message behave. She stiffened instantly. He moved toward the grill, joining a circle of men who greeted him with backslaps and jokes. He laughed loudly, head tilted back, the sound booming through the crowd. No one there knew the truth. Not yet. I inhaled slowly, my heart pounding so hard I felt the pulse in my wounded shoulder. The media stick sat in my pocket. The living room TV inside the house was already powered on. All I needed was one open moment to slip inside and start the video. But timing mattered. If I went too soon, he might follow me. If I waited too long, there would be too many people inside the house for the reveal to hit the way I needed it to. The universe answered for me when Mrs. Callahan from across the street clapped her hands and said she wanted to borrow our big serving spoon. My mother nodded and reached for her keys, but I stepped forward. "I can grab it. I will be right back." She looked at me with worry. "Do not take too long." I squeezed her hand in reassurance and walked toward the house, making sure no one was paying attention. The living room was dim, except for the pale glow of the TV. Waiting like an accomplice. I pulled the media stick from my pocket, plugged it in, and selected the file titled Truth. My hands shook not from fear this time, but from the weight of what was about to happen. The first frame appeared, the cold kitchen light, Richard's shadow on the wall, his voice threatening me. I swallowed hard and turned the volume all the way up. Then I walked back outside. At first, no one noticed. The music and chatter drowned out the muffled sound coming from the house. But then, the song ended abruptly between tracks, and the noise from inside carried across the yard. It was his voice, loud, harsh, unmistakable. "You think anyone will believe you? You think you can make me look bad?" People turned their heads. Confusion spread. A few kids stopped running and looked toward the open windows. Someone laughed awkwardly, assuming it was part of a TV show. Then the next line played, "I will make you kneel." Even from the lawn, I could hear the sharp intake of breath from several neighbors. The crowd went silent, the kind of silence that drops heavily and quickly like a curtain falling. Richard froze mid-sentence at the grill spatula still in hand. His entire body stiffened as his own voice boomed from the living room. "You are nothing without my permission. You will do what I say." Every face around him shifted at once. Confusion, shock, disgust, betrayal. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another said, Is that Richard?" My mother's knees buckled slightly, and I grabbed her arm to keep her from collapsing. Her eyes were wide, filling with tears that trembled but did not fall. Inside the house, the volume climbed as the next clip played. The sound of the knife hitting the counter. My small whimper of pain. His voice snarling, "Look what you made me do." The air around us thickened like the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. Richard dropped the spatula. It clattered onto the grill. He turned toward the house, face draining of color, then flushing bright red. "Stop that!" he snapped, voice cracking. "Someone turn that off." But no one moved. Everyone was too stunned. The file played on. His voice became uglier, more unhinged. "You will kneel, or I will make you. You embarrassed me. You deserve this." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. I felt her shaking. Mrs. Callahan stepped closer to us, her face pale. "Diana," she whispered gently. "Is this real?" My mother could not answer. The clip shifted to the hallway audio, the part where he slammed his hand against the door at 3 in the morning. Then, the part where he told my mother she would lose everything if she questioned him again. Then another clip, the one where he grabbed my hair. Ryan muttered something under his breath but did not move. His expression softened just for a second, like maybe the reality struck him for the first time. The final part of the video played. The recording of the night he cut me. My scream. his threat. You will crawl back. No one will believe you. When the screen went black, the silence was so heavy it felt like the sky itself had paused. Then, someone whispered, "Holy hell." Another neighbor, Mr. Jackson, stepped forward. His wife held onto his arm with a tight grip. Richard tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "This is fake. All of it. She edited it. She set me up. She is trying to ruin me." But he did not sound confident. He sounded frantic, desperate, afraid. He lunged toward the house as if he could run inside and tear the TV from the wall. But two neighbors moved instinctively, blocking the path. Not touching him, just standing there, silent, judging. Then Mrs. Rodriguez pulled out her phone slowly, her eyes fixed on him. "I am calling the police," she said. Richard spun toward her. "Do not you dare!" But his voice faltered, because now the truth was out, and every person on the lawn was looking at him not with the respect he craved, but with horror. My mother finally spoke, her voice so soft I almost did not hear it. "Emily," she whispered, "I am so sorry." Richard pointed at me, his face twisted. "This is your fault. You will pay for this. You little—" And that was when Mr. Jackson stepped between us. "Enough," he said. "You touch her and you will regret it." Richard's mouth snapped shut. "Someone in the back said the cops are on the way." Someone else said, "I cannot believe this." All this time, I stood still, my heart pounding, my body trembling, but something inside me felt lighter than it had in years. The truth was out. The shadow had cracked. No more pretending. No more whispers. No more hiding bruises beneath excuses. Richard looked around wildly, eyes darting from face to face, realizing every lie he had built was crumbling in front of him, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw fear in his expression. Real fear. The kind that comes from a man finally facing a world that sees exactly what he is. A monster exposed. The flashing blue lights arrived faster than I expected, painting the entire block in streaks of cold color that cut through the thick summer evening like a warning siren from another world. Conversations died instantly. Neighbors stepped back in instinctive lines, creating a path from the street to our driveway as two officers climbed out of their cruiser. Their boots hit the pavement with sharp, even steps, the kind that carried authority without effort. The air smelled like charcoal from the grill, mixed with tension and fear, and something else. Something I had not felt in years. Relief. One officer stepped forward, a tall woman with her hair pulled into a tight bun and an expression that said she had seen more domestic calls on summer weekends than anyone should. The other officer, a younger man, kept his hand resting calmly near his radio as his eyes scanned the frozen crowd. "Who placed the call?" The female officer asked, her voice neutral but firm. Mrs. Rodriguez raised her hand and stepped closer. "Over there," she said, pointing at Richard with a trembling finger. The officer followed her gaze. Richard was standing near the porch chest, heaving, face flushed red, like he was boiling inside his own skin. He opened his mouth ready to talk his way out of everything, but the officer held up a hand. "Sir," she said calmly, "I need you to stay where you are." That was the moment I saw it. The shift, the recognition, the way Richard's confidence faltered the second he realized he could not command the room anymore. He had always towered over us with his voice, his anger, his threats. But authority was something he could not bend. Not tonight. The second officer stepped toward me. "Are you Emily Hale?" he asked gently. I nodded. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" he added, glancing at my mother who stood beside me, gripping my arm like she feared I would disappear. Before I could answer, Richard barked out loud enough for the entire block to hear. "She is lying. All of it. She staged this. She has been trying to destroy this family for years." The female officer turned to him again. "Sir, you need to lower your voice. We will get your side of the story." He jabbed a finger toward the house. "That video is edited. She made it up. She cut herself. She staged the whole thing." The officer did not react, except for a small, almost unnoticeable tilt of her head. Then she looked at me. "Emily, are you injured?" My voice caught in my throat. I managed a small nod. She studied the bandage visible beneath the edge of my shirt. Is that from him? I swallowed hard. Yes. My mother began to cry again, the sound quiet and broken, as if years of fear were finally leaking out. The officer nodded once, then she faced Richard fully. Sir, I need you to step away from the house and keep your hands where I can see them. Richard scoffed, rolling his shoulders like he was trying to make himself look bigger. I am not going anywhere. You cannot come here and treat me like a criminal. But then the second officer spoke, his voice steady but firmer than before. We have multiple witnesses who heard threats. We have audio and video evidence. And your wife and stepdaughter both appear terrified. So, yes, we can. Richard opened his mouth again, but the officer took a step closer and repeated slower this time. Hands where I can see them. Something flickered across Richard's face. Not fear, not yet, but awareness. The realization that the audience he relied on for validation had turned into witnesses watching him unravel. He finally raised his hands, but his glare found me sharp enough to scrape bone. You will pay for this, he hissed. You think these cops care about you. You think anyone will side with a girl who runs crying to strangers. The female officer did not let him finish. Sir, turn around. He did not move. Her tone sharpened. Now. Richard turned reluctantly. She cuffed him with practiced efficiency while the second officer read him his rights. The sound of metal clicking around his wrists was louder than anything else that night. Louder than his earlier laughter. Louder than the knife hitting the counter in the video. Louder than my heart pounding inside my chest. When they guided him toward the cruiser, he twisted his neck to look at my mother. Diana, he snarled. Say something. Tell them this is a mistake. My mother stepped back as if burned. I am done, she said softly. Voice trembling but steady. Those 3 words hung in the air like a verdict. For the first time, I saw panic in Richard's eyes. Real panic. Not anger disguised as control. Not rage pretending to be strength. But fear. Actual fear. He lunged slightly toward her, but the officers pushed him gently into the back seat. The door closed with a heavy thud that made the entire block exhale at once. As the cruiser pulled away, neighbors began murmuring in low voices. Some shocked, some whispering things like, I had no idea, or how long has this been happening, or she should have told someone. I stood still numb, watching the red and blue lights fade down the street. Then the second officer returned to me. Emily, can you walk inside so we can take your statement? I nodded. My legs felt unsteady, but they moved. My mother followed, holding onto my arm, and for the first time in years, her touch felt protective instead of desperate. Inside the house, the TV still sat, paused on the final frame of the video. The officer glanced at it, then at me. That looks like serious physical intimidation, he said quietly. I swallowed hard. It was. He asked questions. Where the knife was. How many times Richard had threatened me. How long the abuse had been happening. I answered everything. My voice was softer than normal, but it did not shake. Not anymore. My mother gave her own statement, tears streaking her face as she described years of control fear and silence. She spoke like someone finally letting herself breathe after being underwater too long. When the officers were done, the female officer handed me a brochure about protective orders and survivor resources. Emily, she said gently, you did the right thing tonight. I nodded, though the words did not feel real yet. Right thing or not, my entire world had cracked open. After the officers left the house, felt foreign. Quiet in a way that did not feel dangerous. Quiet in a way that felt like possibility. Ryan had disappeared somewhere during the chaos. My mother stayed beside me on the couch, her hands still shaking. I am so sorry, Emily, she whispered. I should have protected you. I failed you. I put my hand over hers. Mom, we are safe now. She looked at me with eyes full of guilt and grief and something else. Hope. For the first time, I saw hope in her. Outside, neighbors slowly dispersed their conversations lingering in the humid air. Inside, the weight that had been pressing against my chest for years finally loosened. Richard was gone. Arrested. Exposed. And even though I knew the road ahead would not be easy, that fear would linger, that trauma does not disappear with handcuffs, I also knew one truth. The monster had been dragged into the light, and the world finally saw him for what he was. The night after Richard's arrest felt unreal, as if the house had not yet decided whether it wanted to breathe again or collapse under the weight of what had been revealed. The silence inside those walls was no longer suffocating. It was hollow, almost echoing like the aftermath of a long storm when the rain finally stops but the ground is still soaked with fear. My mother and I sat on the couch long after the last neighbor had gone home, the TV still frozen on a black screen that only hours earlier had exposed the truth we spent years tiptoeing around. She wiped her face with trembling fingers, staring ahead like she was afraid to look anywhere else, afraid to acknowledge how drastically the world had shifted in a single night. "I should have left earlier," she whispered. "I should have taken you with me." The apology weighed heavy between us, but instead of anger, I felt a strange and unexpected warmth. She was finally seeing the truth, not through excuses, not through desperate rationalizations, but through her own eyes, through the proof she could no longer deny. We eventually made our way to bed, though neither of us slept. Every creak of the house still made me flinch, my mind half expecting Richard to burst through the door despite knowing he was locked in a county holding cell miles away. Trauma plays its own tricks long after the threat is gone. Sleep finally found me just before dawn, but it was restless. I woke up an hour later with the sheets twisted around my legs, my shoulder pulsing with a deep ache from the earlier struggle. I walked into the kitchen and stopped short at the sight of the overturned chair still lying sideways on the floor. I had forgotten it was there. Seeing it again brought back a sudden rush of bile in my throat. I reached down, slowly righted the chair, and set it back in place, taking back the room one small step at a time. My mother came in behind me, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she probably would not drink. "When do you think he will get out?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her question was not filled with fear this time, but dread. "I do not know," I said honestly. "It depends on the charges they decide to file. It could be tonight. It could be days." She nodded mechanically. For the first time, she seemed to understand that we could not go back to normal, that safety was something we had to choose now, not something we could hope would return on its own. Throughout the day, the neighborhood stayed unusually quiet. People were shaken. A few sent texts or left voicemails for my mother expressing concern, but also confusion about how they had never noticed what lurked beneath our roof. Shame mixed with frustration in her eyes each time she listened, but she no longer tried to defend Richard. Shame is heavy, but denial is heavier, and she was finally letting go of the latter. The hospital called me that afternoon to ask why I had not shown up for my shift. My voice cracked as I explained I had a domestic incident. They did not pry, but the pause on the line told me they knew enough. "We will cover you as long as you need the charge," nurse said. "Take care of yourself." Those words cracked something inside me, something I did not realize I had been holding together with threads. Someone cared. Someone believed me without hesitation. Someone saw me as worthy of protection. The contrast between that and the years of being dismissed or belittled under my mother's roof hit harder than I expected. While my mother took a nap, I walked quietly through the house, noticing the ripple effects of Richard's absence. His boots were still in the hallway, laces tangled. His jacket hung on the hook near the door. His empty bourbon bottle still sat beside the couch. All these pieces of him remained, but the power he held in the house had evaporated. My stomach tightened when I saw the small coil of rope I had shoved into the drawer days earlier. I closed the drawer slowly. That object had nearly become the symbol of my humiliation. Now it was evidence of his downfall. When evening came, the shadows in the house felt less threatening, but no less heavy. My mother cooked dinner quietly, moving hesitantly, her motions small and cautious, like she had forgotten how to inhabit a space without fear. We ate in silence. She stared at her plate, pushing food around with her fork. Finally, she said softly, "I do not think he will let this go." My chest constricted. "I know, but we are not alone anymore. There are neighbors who saw everything. Police. Evidence." She lifted her eyes slowly as if afraid of the hope flickering there. "Are we safe?" she asked. It was the most honest question she had asked in years. I wanted to say yes, completely, absolutely. But safety was not a switch. It was a process, a rebuilding, a reclaiming. "We are safer than before," I said, "and we will take steps to make sure we stay that way." That night, I barely slept again. My shoulder ached. Every time a car drove down the street, headlights flickering across the blinds, my pulse jumped. My mind kept replaying the video, the block party, the moment the officers cuffed him. Relief mixed with terror in a messy, uncooperative blend. This is how survivors live for a long time, in the space between freedom and fear. The next morning brought chaos in a different form. Ryan returned to the house. He burst through the door, red-faced and furious, his voice crackling with disbelief. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted at me. "You ruined everything." Mom started shaking again instantly, her hands gripping the counter. Ryan paced, running his fingers through his hair, his anger unfocused and wild. He called me selfish for exposing Richard. He called me dramatic for recording the evidence. He shouted that I had humiliated the entire family, that neighbors were talking, that everyone looked at him differently now. For a moment, the old instinct kicked in, the instinct to shrink. But something had changed in me. The rope, the knife, the video, the truth. All of it had carved a new kind of steel inside my spine. I did not ruin anything, I said quietly. Richard did. Ryan scoffed so loudly it echoed off the walls. "You think anyone believes that? You think they do not see you for what you are." My mother spoke then. Her voice was soft but firmer than it had been in years. "Enough, Ryan." He turned to her, his mouth dropping open. "You are taking her side." She looked at him with an expression that was equal parts sadness and disappointment. "I am choosing the truth," she said, "for the first time." Ryan looked between us, stunned. Then he stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. My mother's shoulders sagged and she sank into a chair. The quiet that followed was thick and painful, like the moment after the last wave crashes and the sea withdraws, leaving destruction behind. The next few hours passed in a blur of tension, exhaustion, and deep breaths that did little to settle my nerves. Every small noise still made me jump. Every shadow still made my heart skip. But the chaos felt different now, not hopeless, not endless. Richard was gone. His hold over the house was broken. Fear remained, yes, but relief threaded through it, weaving a fragile sense of possibility. And I clung to that possibility with everything I had. Because the aftermath of abuse is messy. It is not a straight line toward healing. It is a jagged climb filled with setbacks and breakthroughs. But that night, sitting beside my mother in a house that no longer belonged to a monster, I felt something I had not felt in a long, long time. Hope. The first 3 months without Richard in the house felt like living inside a fragile dream, the kind that could shatter with one loud noise or one wrong movement. The air felt lighter. The rooms felt bigger. My mother slowly started leaving her bedroom door open at night again. I stopped flinching every time footsteps sounded on the porch. But even with his physical absence, his shadow remained. Survivors learn quickly that monsters do not disappear just because the police take them away. They wait, they simmer, they plot, and Richard was the kind of man who could not stand losing control, especially not in public, especially not to me. The restraining order arrived 2 weeks after the block party, a thin stack of papers declaring he could not come near us. The words felt powerful on the page, but power on paper means very little to men like him. My anxiety never fully relaxed. Every time a truck rumbled down the street, my breath caught. Every time someone knocked on the door, my chest tightened. Trauma trains you to expect danger even when logic tells you it is over. My mother tried to settle into something resembling normal life. She took extra shifts at the motel. She cleaned the house more than necessary, as if scrubbing the walls could erase the memories. She bought herself a small lavender plant for the kitchen window, the first decorative thing she had allowed herself in years. But fear does not vanish on schedule. It lingers, it waits, and sometimes it gives a warning before it hits again. That warning came one humid evening in early September. I had just returned from the hospital after a long shift, my back aching, my scrub top wrinkled. My mother was in the living room folding laundry when the porch light flickered on automatically. I heard it through the window. She did not react. I did. I froze mid-step, blood running cold in an instant. The motion sensor only triggered when someone approached the door. Before I could speak, 3 hard knocks rattled the wooden frame. My mother's face went pale. "Emily," she whispered. "No." I stepped toward the door cautiously, every nerve inside me sparking like a live wire. Through the frosted glass pane, I saw a shape, a broad shoulder, a familiar outline. My lungs constricted. My body reacted before my mind caught up. He should not be here. He was not allowed to be here. And yet he was. Standing on our porch like he still owned the house, like he still owned us. I swallowed hard and opened the door just 2 inches enough to see him, not enough to let him in. He looked terrible. His hair was greasy, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He reeked of stale bourbon and desperation. "Emily," he said, voice cracked and heavy. "Please, I need to talk to you." I tightened my grip on the door. "You cannot be here. There is a restraining order. You know that." He shook his head like I was a child who misunderstood something simple. "I am not here to fight. I am not here to cause trouble. I just need you to listen. It is important." My mother stepped beside me, but I motioned for her to stay back. Richard leaned closer, his face inches from the glass. His voice dropped to a soft, trembling whisper, one he had never used before. "I am sorry. For everything. I swear it." He wiped his face with his palm, smearing the sheen of sweat across his forehead. "I lost my job. The garage fired me. The neighbors will not talk to me. My own son barely answers my calls. I need my family back. I need you both." My skin crawled. Something was wrong beneath the performance. His words were polished, but his eyes were frantic, not regretful. Frantic. I reinforced my voice. "You need to leave. Now." His expression snapped, the mask crumbling. "You think you are better than me?" he hissed. "You think one stupid video makes you some kind of hero?" His voice raised an octave, trembling with suppressed rage. "You think you can destroy me and just go on with your life?" My grip on the door tightened. "Leave, before I call the police." He slammed his hand against the glass, making my mother gasp behind me. The sound vibrated through my bones. "You owe me, Emily," he growled. "After everything I did for this family, after everything I gave you, you do not get to shut me out." I steadied my voice, even though my heart hammered violently. "I owe you nothing." For a moment, he just stared at me, breathing heavily. Then something in his eyes changed. Not anger, not grief, something colder, a calculation. He lowered his voice to a whisper. "You think you have won, but you have no idea what losing actually feels like." My mother stepped forward, then her face white but determined. "Go away, Richard, now." He scoffed, looking past me and straight at her. "Well, well," he sneered. "Looks like you finally grew a spine." She flinched, but she did not back down. I pressed the door closed another inch. "Last chance, Richard. Leave or I am calling the police." He stared at me for several long, suffocating seconds. Then he chuckled a low, mirthless sound that made my skin prickle. "Fine," he said. "Call them. They cannot keep me away forever. But remember this. You made me lose everything. And people with nothing left do not have anything to fear." He turned and walked down the steps, stumbling slightly, but not enough to slow him. I watched him until he reached the sidewalk. He glanced back, once eyes burning with a promise I knew he intended to keep. Then he disappeared into the night. My mother collapsed into a chair the second the door clicked shut. I locked it twice, then checked the window latches, even though I knew it would not stop him if he truly wanted to come back. The air inside the house felt heavy again, like the oxygen had thickened with dread. I sank into a seat across from her, my heart finally slowing enough for breath to reach my lungs. "He will not stop," she whispered. "Not until he gets what he wants." I took her hand, squeezing gently. He is going to jail again. I am calling it in. And this time there will be consequences he cannot walk away from. I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency line. My voice stayed steady even as my hands shook. I told them he had violated the restraining order, that he had threatened us, that he had pounded on the door. They said an officer would be sent to take a report. It took 30 minutes. 30 minutes of sitting in a living room that suddenly felt too small, too dark, too vulnerable. The officer who arrived was calm and direct. I described everything. Every word he said, every threat, every movement. He recorded it all. Then he nodded. "We will find him tonight," he said, "and he will be taken in for violating the protection order." My mother exhaled shakily, relief and terror mixing in equal measure. "Thank you," she whispered. After the officer left, we sat quietly, not speaking, not crying, just breathing. The audacity of Richard's return had shaken us deeply, but it had also done something unexpected. It reminded us that monsters do not vanish just because you expose them. They return, they push back, they try one more time to reclaim control. But this time, he had walked straight into the consequences. This time, we were not hiding. And as the night deepened, a strange, fierce certainty settled inside me. He had come back once. He would never get the chance again. The morning after Richard violated the restraining order felt strangely quiet, as if the world itself was pausing to breathe with us. I woke before sunrise, not because of fear this time, but because my body seemed to know something had shifted. My shoulder ached in that familiar dull throb beneath the scar, but it no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a reminder, a marker of the night my life changed direction. The police called at 7:30 to confirm they had picked him up only a few blocks from our house. He had been drunk and yelling at passing cars, insisting he needed to get home because his family was waiting for him. Hearing that report left me with a strange mix of emotions. Relief that he was in custody, gratitude that he had not hurt anyone else, and something more complicated, something like grief for the years we lost living under his shadow. My mother sat with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, staring at the swirling steam as if it could tell her the future. She looked older than she had the day before, but she also looked freer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "I do not want to go back to that house," she said. "Not again." I nodded. I knew exactly what she meant. That house had become a battlefield. Every wall carried an echo. Every room held a memory we did not want. We spent the next week packing only the essentials: clothes, documents, a few family photos of me with my father before he passed away. My mother refused to take anything Richard bought, even the furniture. She said she wanted a clean start, something untainted by him. We moved into a small rental apartment on the edge of town, nothing fancy but quiet and safe. For the first time in years, my mother slept through the night without waking in a panic. I started to breathe differently too, like I was learning again what air felt like when it was not thick with dread. The scar on my shoulder had healed into a thin, raised line. Sometimes it itched. Sometimes it burned slightly when I moved wrong. But every time I caught sight of it in the mirror, something inside me straightened. I survived that night. I walked away, and I fought back in a way that mattered. A few weeks after we moved, I signed up for a self-defense program at a local community center. Not because I expected another attack, but because I wanted the confidence to never freeze again. The instructor, a retired police officer named Carla, took one look at the way I held my arms and knew. She did not ask questions, but she pushed me harder than the others. She taught me how to break holds, how to disable someone long enough to run, how to read body language, and how to trust my instincts again. The first time I practiced with a partner and did not flinch when he moved toward me. I felt something inside my chest loosen like a knot finally coming undone. My mother started her own journey too. She began weekly therapy sessions. She joined a support group for survivors of domestic violence. She even got her hair cut short, saying she wanted to feel lighter. And she did. For the first time in years, she looked like a woman who had dreams instead of fears. One Saturday afternoon, about 3 months after the block party, I decided to return to the old house alone. I did not tell my mother because I knew she would worry, and I did not want her to revisit the place until I knew it was safe to step inside. The house was empty and silent when I arrived. A bank-owned property sign hung crookedly in the yard. Richard had lost everything in the aftermath: his job, his reputation, his home, and while I did not revel in someone's destruction, I could not pretend he had not earned these consequences with every cruel word and violent action. The front door creaked when I pushed it open. The living room smelled like dust and stale air. The carpets had been pulled up. The walls were scuffed from movers removing what little furniture he had left. I walked through the rooms, slowly letting myself feel every memory, acknowledging them, without letting them swallow me. When I reached the kitchen, my steps faltered. The overhead light made a faint buzzing sound, flickering once before staying steady. The counters were bare. The table was gone, but the space felt exactly the same. This was where he had cornered me with the knife. This was where he tried to take the last piece of control I refused to surrender. I stepped toward the spot near the counter where it happened. I closed my eyes and placed my hand on the cool surface. I let the memory come. The glint of the knife under the fluorescent light. The tremor in my breath. The burn of the blade when it cut my shoulder. The sound of my heartbeat pounding so loud I could barely hear his voice. For a moment, my throat tightened, but then I exhaled and opened my eyes. The kitchen did not feel like a crime scene anymore. It felt like the last chapter of a book I had already finished. I reached up and touched the scar on my shoulder. It no longer pulsed with fear. It pulsed with strength. That night in the kitchen had broken something important inside me, but it had also freed something even more important. It freed the part of me that believed I deserved peace, that I deserved safety, that I deserved more than survival. I took one last look around and then walked out of the house. When I pulled the door shut behind me, it made a soft click, a quiet sound that felt strangely final, like closing a book gently rather than slamming it shut. A week later, the court issued a long-term restraining order against Richard. He would not be allowed within miles of us for years. Ryan moved out of state shortly after, too embarrassed to face the town that no longer saw him as the golden boy he believed he was. My mother and I built new routines. We cooked dinner together. We watched old movies on Friday nights. We laughed again. Real laughter. Not the brittle, cautious kind we had learned to survive with. Sometimes I would catch her humming in the kitchen while watering her lavender plant. Sometimes she would touch my shoulder lightly, checking the scar without needing to ask if it still hurt. I would smile and tell her it did not hurt anymore. And it was true. Not physically, not emotionally, not the way it used to. On the first snow of winter, I stood outside on our apartment balcony, watching the flakes gather on the railing. My mother came out beside me, wrapping her coat tight. The world looked soft and bright and clean. Fresh snow always feels like a reset. She leaned her head on my arm. "I am proud of you," she said. "So proud." I swallowed a lump in my throat. I am proud of us. Later that night, when I was alone in my room, I traced the scar again. It was no longer a mark of what had been done to me. It was a symbol of what I refused to let define me. He cornered me once, but he would never have even a piece of me again. That scar freed me, not because of the pain it carried, but because of the strength it revealed, and I finally understood something. Survival is not the end of the story. Freedom is. If you stayed with me through every moment of this story, through the fear and the nights that seemed endless, and the quiet victories that finally brought light back into my life, then I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. My journey was not simple, and it was not clean or heroic in the way movies make survival look. It was raw. It was painful. It was lonely at times. But it was real. And if you are here reading this, then maybe some part of my story touched something inside you too. Maybe you have lived through a home where raising your voice was dangerous, where you learned to read footsteps the way other people read weather. Maybe you know what it feels like to shrink yourself so someone else does not explode. Or maybe you are still learning how to breathe again after leaving someone who tried to break you. I want you to hear me clearly. You are not alone. You are not imagining things, and you are not weak for wanting peace. The scar on my shoulder is only one of the marks Richard left behind, but it is also proof that even wounds that burn can become reminders of strength. Maybe you have your own scar, whether it shows on your skin or lives quietly under the surface where no one else can see it. Maybe today is the day you realize it does not have to define you anymore. If my story resonated with you, if you felt even a moment of anger or sadness or hope, I would love to know where you are watching from right now. Drop your location and your local time in the comments below. It helps me remember that these words travel farther than fear ever could. And tell me this just between us. What would you have done if you walked into that kitchen and someone you trusted cornered you with a knife? Would you freeze? Would you fight? Would you run? There is no wrong answer. There is only the truth of how human beings survive the unthinkable. If you believe stories like this matter, if you believe people deserve to be heard when their own families try to silence them, then consider supporting the channel by liking this video, subscribing, or sharing it with someone who might need strength today. Your support does more than help my channel grow. It helps keep these conversations alive, especially for viewers in their 50s and beyond who know the weight of family secrets and the cost of silence better than anyone. And if you are someone currently living in fear, wondering if there is a way out, I hope this story shows you that escape is possible, that rebuilding is possible, that peace is possible. It does not happen overnight. It does not happen without pain, but it happens. Little by little, day by day, one brave step at a time. So, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for giving this story a space to exist. And wherever you are right now, I hope you feel safe. I hope you feel seen. I hope you feel stronger than when you started reading, because the truth is simple. Even after everything, even after nights that felt impossible, you can rise again. And if no one has told you that today, let me be the one who does. You deserve a life without fear. You deserve peace. And you deserve to be free.